昨天的事情，想必大家都知道了。在这里，我首先对以色列的人民和受害者表达最诚挚的哀悼和哀伤，同时也对哈马斯恐怖分子的行为表达最强烈的谴责和愤怒。哈马斯对以色列发动了恐怖袭击，导致了无辜人民的死亡，包括儿童、老人和妇女。这些受害者本应安全且幸福地生活在社会中，但却因为恐怖袭击而失去了生命。这不仅令人痛心，还引发了国际社会的愤怒和哀伤。恐怖袭击剥夺了这些受害者的家庭、朋友和社区的未来。我们看到哈马斯恐怖组织绑架妇女，将她们用作筹码，甚至对她们进行性奴役。这种行为不仅侵犯了受害者的基本权益，还加剧了性别不平等。国际社会必须坚决反对这种侵犯妇女权益的行为。国际社会也应该追究这些恐怖分子的司法责任。同时，昨天流露出来的视频，我们还看到这些恐怖分子绑架、虐待小孩，并且当着小孩的面处决亲人。这些行为是对人权的严重侵犯，也给这些孩子的身心健康造成了巨大影响。同时，我们还看到哈马斯恐怖分子将绑架而来的老人游街示众，这种禽兽的行为令人不齿。依据孙中山先生的民族主义精神，我们要同世界上所有弱小和受到欺凌的民族站在一起。因此，我再一次重申和表达我的立场，我毫无保留地谴责哈马斯恐怖主义的禽兽行径，并且未来几期我将改变我的这个视频发布计划，我可能会先做几期关于以色列的视频，最后的最后，我转发以色列国防部发言人的视频，希望大家能多多了解以色列，以及从国防部发言人中的发言能够明确地看到野蛮和文明之间的差距。
Good evening, everyone joining us. This is a live Twitter on the official IDF Twitter page. My name is Jonathan. I'm a reserve IDF spokesperson, and I'm here today to share the situation on the ground from Israel. All of you watching, wanting to know what's going on in Israel, caring, worried, hearing the news about today's atrocities against Israeli civilians and soldiers by Hamas. My aim here is to provide you with our information, the situation on the ground as it is today, currently, what tomorrow holds, and what we're planning on doing in response to these barbaric attacks against our civilians. I'll try to take a few questions at the end. So this is a very sad day in Israel. It started early morning hours with a combined, unprecedented attack against Israeli civilians and the military. Hamas terrorists. Today we can assume that there were high number of hundreds of terrorists that crossed from Gaza into Israel. They attacked dozens of Israeli communities and IDF bases, and they went door to door, house to house in search of Israeli civilians, executed in cold blood Israeli civilians in their homes, and then continued to drag into Gaza Israeli civilians and military personnel. And in terms of the civilians, I'm talking women, children, elderly, disabled, that were dragged into Gaza by the terrorists from the Gaza Strip. The numbers are unprecedented. We're talking about more than 200 Israelis that have been killed, and I can say with sadness that these are not the final figures as the night unfolds, and as tomorrow will come, that number will unfortunately rise, and we have sustained more than 1,200 Israeli casualties, both military and civilian. These are numbers that have never been heard before in Israel, definitely not that amount of Israeli civilians being killed, and that is unfortunately not the end of it. I am sad to say that we have a significant number of Israelis held by Hamas in Gaza, both civilians and soldiers, alive and presumed dead, at numbers that were up until now unimaginable. This will shape and influence the future of this war against Israel, and it will shape the future of what we're doing against Hamas. As we speak, you can see the skyline of Tel Aviv behind me. It's currently quiet. I don't think it will remain quiet for the entire night, but we'll wait and see. There have been heavy barrages of rockets towards central Israel and southern Israel throughout the entire day. It started early morning, and the last big barrage of rockets was a few hours ago. More than 3,000 rockets have been fired at Israel, aimed at Israeli civilians, and unfortunately they have claimed a heavy toll in human life in Israel as well. Thanks to the Iron Dome, we have not sustained tremendous casualties from the rockets that have been fired. The overwhelming majority of the casualties that we have sustained have been from close contact fighting, or rather executions and cold-blooded killings of Israeli civilians and soldiers by Hamas terrorists. As we're speaking, the situation in Israel is still not fully under control. There's still fighting ongoing in southern Israel. There are still Hamas terrorists inside Israel, and Israeli special forces and IDF troops are fighting, going house to house and making sure that each and every community is clear and rid of all of the terrorists that crossed into Israel. And again, there were a high number of hundreds of terrorists that crossed from Gaza into Israel today. And I know of more than 200 terrorists that have been killed by the IDF. Some of them inside Israel, some of them trying to flee back to the Gaza Strip. More than 200 have been killed by our troops, and that is also a dynamic number, and I think that number will rise. I hope it will rise significantly as the night unfolds and as tomorrow comes. The first priority of the IDF is to restore the situation in the south, to make sure that our Israeli communities are safe, and then to get a full and comprehensive tally of the numbers of Israelis, where everybody is, and account for each and every Israeli civilian and soldier. Then to make sure that the border is closed and that future attacks are prevented, and that Hamas won't have any other opportunities to attack Israel. Third, and that's already ongoing, we will start to strike Hamas's military targets in Gaza. And that's the stage when we start responding to Hamas aggression and attacks. That's usually the stage when the world starts to count Palestinian deaths and lecture us about humanity and the use of force. Let me remind everybody how this started. It started with the butchering and the cold-blooded execution of Israeli civilians by Hamas, unprovoked, into Israel. An unprecedented level of violence against Israeli civilians will generate an unprecedented Israeli response against Hamas. And it is Hamas who is responsible for the violence. Each and every Israeli killed and each and every Palestinian killed. It's blood on Hamas's hands, and they are responsible for everything that is happening and that will happen in the coming days and weeks as this war unfolds. For everybody here listening, watching, for those of you who care about truth and defending democracy, defending freedom, and for free, democratic, sovereign countries defending themselves against evil, dark, medieval extremists, then I urge you, speak up, support Israel. Share and retweet this video. Share our information. Share our messages that we release. And make sure that you stand up to slander of Israel, to misinformation, to bias against Israel, to thinly concealed anti-Semitism and BDS masquerading as support for Palestinians or masquerading as care for Palestinian civilians. I can assure you that the IDF will be very measured in its response, and that we, unlike our enemies, hold human life dear. But I can also assure you that today is a different day, and that the response that Israel will deliver against Hamas will be unlike anything that we have done in the past. I hope you, if you're abroad, and if you can and want to, reach out to legislators, if you want to reach out to your members of parliament, Congress, if you want to reach out to media and tell them to reflect the situation in Israel fairly, to hold Israel to the same standards as any other free democratic country defending its civilians against murderous terrorists, and not to judge Israel by any other standards. Those are standards that we hold, and we will fight according to international law, we will fight according to our morals, and we will fight in order to defend our civilians. And we shouldn't be held to any other standards that no other Western democracy is held to, especially not when our civilians are butchered and dragged off to be paraded on the streets of Gaza and held captive. This is going to be a long and difficult war. We have this has just started, and it started in what is probably the worst fashion ever imaginable for Israel. An extremely difficult day. Tomorrow will be a difficult day because the numbers and names of our casualties will start to become known, and we will see sorrow and grief spreading over entire Israel. But for all of you around the world who may not be supporters of Israel, then you stand to be disappointed, because whenever hardship presents itself to Israel, we have this natural ability and instinct to come together, to stand strong, to galvanize around our forces, and to focus on what needs to be done. And that is the stage that we are in now. We may have sustained extremely heavy casualties, but we will focus, we will strike back, and we will make Hamas pay a price that they have never paid before, hopefully until their destruction. I wish all of you the best. Stay safe, stay informed, and please don't fall into the traps of knee-jerk Israel bashing and criticizing of Israel. Thank you, and shalom from Tel Aviv.